This is Frank Islam, Chairman and CEO of FY Investment Group and your host of Washington Current Review, where we interview leading voices from business and politics that impact you, our view. Today our guest is Bharath Gopalaswamy, and you're a good friend of mine. I've known each other for a long time. I know you work for Atlantic Council, and you're in charge of the South Asia Center. Tell us a little bit about yourself, in addition to that, what you have been doing in Atlantic Council.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you for inviting me. Belated happy 2019. And I want to let you know this year we celebrated the 10th anniversary of our center, which you proudly co-founded.
Yes.
And we are very grateful to you, and we want to convey the wishes and regards and greetings from our leadership for that.
Thank you very much.
This has been an important initiative that you have begun, and we want to carry the mantle forward to the best of our interests everywhere. So, yes, my name is Bharath Gopalaswamy, as you've introduced me. I direct the South Asia Center. I'm almost about to complete my 6 years at the South Asia Center.
Wow.
I am an engineer by training, by which most Indian products, Indian exports are engineers and medicine, students of medicine. I studied engineering. I received a PhD in engineering. I worked with the Indian Space Research Establishment. I worked with the European Space Research Establishment. And at some point in my career, I thought I would want to do some bit of public service.
Are you doing the public service?
And, you know, the opportunity came my way while engineering was a profession. Policy was always a passion, and I got the opportunity, and not many, as I say, not many are paid to do what they love to do.
And you love your job.
And I have loved my job, and I have enjoyed working with the South Asia Center, and that's where I currently find myself in.
So to tell me a little bit, what are the priorities going to be for South Asia Center for the year 2019? Why was it established? Because the South Asia is important to America and to the world?
I think, you know, Fred Kemp and General Scowcroft. Fred Kemp is our CEO, General Scowcroft, who has been forever our mentor, chairman, and whatever title you want to.
He's a great man.
He's a great man. They had this vision that the Atlantic Council by itself is restricted to the transatlantic partnership. But somewhere along they had the vision that the world cannot be only restricted in the two continents, and it had to go beyond. And South Asia was one of our first regional centers to be formed. And thanks to you again. And, you know, they had that vision. And at that time, NATO was also fighting a big war in Afghanistan. So we knew that we had to be relevant, we had to step into territories, areas, and grounds that were unfamiliar to us. And South Asia, where 1/3 of the humanity currently lies,
no question
had to be paid attention to, and rightfully so. Today, it's the epicenter of economics,
and especially the India, which we share our values and democratic values that binds us together as two countries.
Correct. Today, where you see, you know, fraying of liberal democracies, rise of authoritarianism, and all these values that the United States had stood for, India was a pillar and beacon of hope in this. And
it still remains to be the pillar and the beacon of hope for the world.
And it's one of the most unique, valuable, and the strongest partnership that the United States has, ironically, you know, all through the Cold War.
So what are the priorities going to be for 2019 for Atlantic Council?
I think, you know, the priorities are, of course, first and foremost, which you read in the news every day today, Afghanistan.
Afghanistan. So tell me a little bit about the relationship between U.S., India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and tell me a little bit about my friend Ambassador Khalilzad has done in terms of the peace process with the Taliban. Do you think it's going to be successful? Do you think it's the right thing to do?
I'm a believer. I think Ambassador Khalilzad, and knowing Khalilzad, is known to pull rabbits out of his hat. You know him very well.
Extremely well.
And he can pull rabbits out of his hat.
Well, also he knows.
He knows the region
Afghanistan very well. He was an ambassador to Afghanistan and also to the United Nations, as well as to Iraq.
Yes, and you know, rightfully you mentioned also the Iraq issue, because the influence of the Middle East today in the peace process in Afghanistan. If you see bulk of the negotiations is either carried out in Doha, or sometimes he shuttles between Abu Dhabi and Doha and Afghanistan. So that's where, you know, his energy is being spent today, and I'm sure he will be successful. But of course there are important elements that need for him to be successful, and we don't want a rushed peace process, an incomplete peace process. And as Ambassador Khalilzad, I might be not quoting the entire quote, nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. That's his quote. And one of them is to whatever institutions in terms of government and social infrastructure that we've built in Afghanistan needs to be preserved and treasured in terms of our achievement. And if that is not an integral part of the agreement, by which I mean if we cannot agree for the Taliban to speak to the Afghan government that we have helped institute in the place, then that will be an important setback. But that's why I believe Khalilzad is right now in Kabul trying to get that piece of the deal wrapped up so that we can arrive at the same agreement.
I want to talk a little bit about the relationship between the U.S. and India. Do you think that as President Obama says, the defining relationship between the two countries is still being defined?
Definition is always evolving, right? Definitions are always evolving. I think the United States and India relationship is one of the most unique partnerships, as I've said before. I also want to add this, the United States and India relationship, as I put it,
it's a bipartisan support. You have to say, no matter who is in the White House, they will engage and evolve with the relationship with India. That's important.
That's correct. And that's a continuity, right? Yeah. I mean, we've had a bipartisan support in almost every aspect. Yeah. There are frictions, but I also had in one of my CEO speech to Delhi, I put this in terms of U.S.-India relationship. I said, for a few years, it's something like this. It's like a boring marriage, largely defined by its extramarital affairs. Whenever we think of India,
I'm not sure about that part.
It's either Afghanistan or Pakistan or something. But, you have a unique, from 98, I want to recalibrate this relationship from 98, where we left off. India was a sanctioned country. Today, you have a trade of almost $150 billion with the potential being...
What about the tariffs that this administration has put? What about the H-1B visa problems you have? And what do you think the trade will go to about $1 trillion in the year 2040?
I think, look...
I really think it has a potential to go there.
It has a potential. It's a natural sequence. The curve is up,
Well, we have come a long way.
We've come a long way. And these H-1Bs and trade tariffs, these are just minor frictions. And these are important corrections that need to be had. But the good news is we're able to have these frank and candid conversations. It's not a question of whether India will be here or there. It's a question of how do we correct these things so that we can get to where we need to get to. And these are conversations that are being held. And in this context, I would want to define that the Atlantic Council has instituted a U.S.-India trade project. We've recently hired Mark Linscott, who was the assistant USTR. And he's part of the Atlantic Council leading us on this important trade issue, which we believe is an important issue that needs to be addressed from a think tank angle. And that's where we've made the investment to have Mark Linscott join us and lead this delegation to India.
Wonderful. So tell us a little bit about the fact that China is rising. To me, China has already risen. What role are they trying to carve out in South Asia?
China is trying to...
And especially with what's going on in Pakistan with the China corridor.
I mean, I think China is not only with... in Asia, obviously, they're a significant neighbor. China is occupying a central role, not only in Asia, but along everywhere in the globe. No matter wherever you go today, any international affairs conversation is devoid without the word China being spelt out. It was not there today, it is there everywhere.
They have the second largest economy in the world.
They have the second largest economy, and their global footprint and their security footprint is also not to be underestimated. For today, the crisis going on in Venezuela, right? You have the United States and its European partners and allies on one block, and you have the Chinese, Russian. And if you look at that, there is a block of China, Russia, Iran, all aligning on the other side. So one of their objectives today is to raise the cost of conflict for the United States, and wherever the United States goes, make it difficult. So in South Asia, where they have, they've engaged states like Pakistan, Sri Lanka. You mentioned Pakistan, where the China-Pakistan economic corridor.
Pakistan corridor.
Yeah, I mean, and Christine Fair and others have colorfully defined that as colonizing Pakistan to enrich China. Right? I mean,
well, that's their view.
That's their view, but
I'm sure China is Pakistan is driving some benefit because it's creating some jobs for them.
Correct, and there is obviously.
But China has its own interest. There's no question.
China has its own interest, but all that's said and done, if today these countries are desperately in need of infrastructure, and if somebody is carrying big loads of cash to them and saying we are helping you build bridges, hospitals, educational institutions, if I were in their place, I would gladly welcome the investment and money, because when you're desperately in need of infrastructure and in terms of capital for it, you're going to take that money. And that's where I think the United States has realized this in terms of its Indo-Pacific vision, trying to come up with suitable alternatives and trying to see how we can how we can promote our own objectives and policies.
I wanted to kind of shift the gears because the same thing that you're talking about, the relationship between India and Afghanistan, India and Pakistan, where we are, where we headed, what's going to happen?
Right. I mean, with India and Afghanistan, India has always maintained that it wants to have a developmental role in Afghanistan. I think it is slightly nervous with with what's going to come out of the United States, when the troop withdrawal is going to be, what are the conditions.
Well, I would hope the troop withdrawal will not occur so quickly as they envision.
Yeah, I mean, like many of my friends would like to put it, sometimes they're only a tweet away.
Yeah.
But that said, we'll have to, we're all optimists and believers, otherwise we'll not be doing what we are doing currently. And I think there is some sort of sanity and
do you see a brighter horizon between India and Pakistan relationship?
Yeah,
they are neighbors.
They're neighbors.
They breathe the same air. They nourish and nurture their.
I also want to point out something here, right? I mean, around 1999, Clinton called us the most dangerous place on earth, right? Since then, these are both nuclear weapons powers. They've gone to the brink of war 3 times.
Yes.
But at the same time, restraint and common sense has prevailed between these 2 countries. Not that we can take that for granted. Now, if that's a glitter of hope for me, then there is hope ahead. But despite the worst case assumptions of many of the nuclear theorists and alarmists, India and Pakistan have held against a nuclear war so far. So let's hope that, there is a dialogue that's still happening at sub-conventional levels or conventional levels or tracking levels.
Yeah. Some of the things that Imran Khan has done in terms of trying to get the pilgrimage for the Sikh people to come to Pakistan it's a good first step.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it's great. And there are all these Punjab politicians, and there is an active.
And some of them have gone there.
Some of them, yeah. And outside, in South Asia, lives outside South Asia. Here, if you look at the South Asian community, or you go to Vancouver, or you go to New York, the Indians and Pakistanis identify themselves as South Asians.
That is true.
That's true. So I think there is a lot of goodwill and a lot of constituency, and that's where I see the hope lie and reside.
I would hope there is a common ground for them to work together, because they do have a shared goal and shared responsibility.
Yeah, they have, and they owe it to their own generations to come next. So that.
Well, to talk a little bit about the peace process, what will be India's role here if this does happen between the Taliban and Afghanistan?
The India's role, as far as India has not had a seat at the table, at least a formal seat at the table.
Not so far.
Not so far.
And I'm sure that Pakistan didn't have any seat on the table either.
Correct. But India is closely watching this. Zalmay Khalilzad has been to India. He's reassured the Indians. Yes. And his view is, they have
a role to play.
They have a role to
play. And
I'm
sure that Pakistan have a role to play.
Yeah, I mean, they have a more than a developmental. They've built a parliament, and they've been responsible for scholarships, hospitals. And so that's where I think India's role will increase in the years to come.
Well, thank you very much, Bharath, for coming over here and shedding light on some of the things that you and I talked about, and thank you for this.
Pleasure. Thank you.
This is Frank Islam wishing you a great week, and thank you for watching.